economic science is a value-free science. That is, the truth and falsity of economic propositions can be evaluated according to the truth criterion alone. They do not make any statements about which policy should be pursued. So we have here the concept of value freedom, which was stressed in particular by a German sociologist of the name of Max Weber. Science, in a strict sense, is about is propositions rather than ought propositions. So we have here another name, namely David Hume, British philosopher of the 18th century, who stressed the distinction between is and ought, is and ought propositions. So Hume said in particular that there's no way that we can arrive at an ought proposition by starting from premises that are is propositions. So the question then is, how is it in economic science? To give you just one example, how economic propositions that show that economic propositions are is propositions that can be used in various ways according to different value judgments. Let's consider the labor market. So we have here supply of labor, and we have demand of labor, and we know that, so here quantity, labor hours, and we have here the wage rate, nominal wage rate, a big W, and in equilibrium we have an equilibrium wage rate and an equilibrium quantity. And so now we can do various things, and in particular we can imagine or analyze the impact of a minimum wage law. So let's say the minimum wage law fixes the minimum wage rate at this level here. What will be the impact on the labor market? Well, there will be none. Okay, because the market wage rate, the wage rate that comes to be established spontaneously on the market is, if we fix the minimum wage rate here, so it will be none, right? The market wage rate is higher than the minimum wage rate, so there's no problem at all. A problem arises if we set the minimum wage rate here, because at this rate, we have this demand for labor, but this supply. Okay, so we have a difference between demand and supply, and this difference is called, how is it called? Unemployment. That's right. Okay, so we have a higher supply of labor than demand for labor, and this is exactly what unemployment is all about. Now, this is a purely fact-based analysis. There's no value judgment here whatever. We don't say unemployment is good or bad, or it is good or bad that there is such a thing as a demand for labor, is it good or bad that there's a supply of labor. Well, as we know that some socialists, and I mentioned this yesterday, right, they think that it's bad that there should be a market for labor because it's denigrating and demeaning for human beings to sell labor hours and so on. But we're not concerned about this. It's a fact that there is such a thing as an exchange taking place. So we're not concerned about the moral evaluation of this. We're just saying it's a fact that these exchanges do take place, and if the conditions are such that the minimum wage rate is set above the market rate, then we do have unemployment. Okay. Now, in fact, this purely factual information can be used according to different value judgments. For example, the natural reaction, I think that's the, according to my value judgment, that's the normal, the non-pathological reaction faced to this information is to say, well, minimum wage laws are bad. Because either they don't have any impact at all if they are lower than the market wage rate, or if they are higher than the market wage rate, well, they bring about unemployment. So they bring about misery for some people. Right? And so my value judgment would be, well, therefore then we should not have minimum wage laws. Okay. Now, but that does not follow at all, so my ought here does not follow at all from the is analysis. You can very well arrive at a very different conclusion. For example, you might say, well, I want to have minimum wage laws precisely because it brings about unemployment. And that seems to be absurd, but in fact it is not that absurd, because there are historical cases where we can identify political proposals that boil down exactly to such a position. The matter becomes clearer if we think about, well, who will be actually fired, who will become unemployed if we have minimum wage laws? Well, it will be those people whose the marginal productivity of whose labor is inferior to the minimum wage laws, right? So if we have, let's see, the minimum wage, or the market wage rate would be something like, whatever, 8 euros or 7 euros, and then market would be 10 or 11. And then we set the minimum wage law slightly higher, let's say 12 or so, or 13. Well, it's clear that it wouldn't be Bill Gates who will become unemployed, okay? Will not be most professors and so on. But it will be people whose value productivity of whose labor is low. So who is this typically? Well, unexperienced people such as children, handicapped people, immigrants, right, whose access to the labor market is reduced by the fact that they don't master the language, and similar things, females looking for part-time jobs and so on. Now, based on this information that it will be some rather minorities or low performance groups that will be affected most, it might be that you have politicians who seek precisely this outcome. For example, in the early 20th century, the California labor unions have pressed for minimum wage laws precisely because they knew that the Chinese immigrants, so their main competitors on the market, would be affected most. During the 19th century, most labor unions in Europe have pressed for minimum wage laws because they knew that these laws would affect child labor most, okay, and female labor. Today, we might say in the US, there are some bad mouths who say, well, certain democratic politicians advocate minimum wage laws because they know precisely that these laws will create misery among their main constituency. So they want to create miscontents and unhappy people, because only then they create conditions of social unrest that would create greater left-wing radicalization among their constituency. So this, of course, all this seems to be rather perverse, and I think it is perverse according to my value judgments. But what we see here, and that is my point, is that you can arrive at very different ought statements based on the very same information that economic science provides you with. Okay, so economics is value-free, it's purely fact-based information, and then you can make very different uses with it.